My name is Tarik Moody. I work at 88.9. How many of you listen to 88.9 Radio Milwaukee? Been here for almost 8 years. Shockingly, still don't believe I've been here for 8 years. I am evening music host. You can tune to me every Monday through Fridays from 6 to 9. I'm also the digital director, responsible for everything digital regarding the station. And you might have heard me say that on the air I go Tarik, aka the architect, and most people think, oh, you're an architect of music, you're an architect of making sounds, and like, no, I was actually practicing architect. So I'm going to start this slide. So crossing over to the unknown, to new experiences, to challenges. My life has been full of crossovers of where there's careers, hobbies, traveling. Since I've been born, my life is a crossover. Well, the picture you see right there, it's kind of an interesting story. It's actually in a gallery in Japan. It's a Japanese photographer who did this book of 1,000 funny faces. And when I was in Austin, he came up to me and, hey, I want to take your picture. I'm like, okay, but you got to make a funny face. And I said, I don't know about that. And I said, why not? You know, sure, what do I have to lose? So I did it, and he friended me on Facebook, and then he sent me pictures of the gallery exhibit and this photo. And you see, I put myself out there for all of Japan to see. Part of the reason why I bring that up is the part of the crossover is taking chances. It's growing up, I was a very shy kid. I didn't put myself out there. But for some reason I thought, well, if I don't do this, then I'm not gonna, get opportunities in life. So I always try to put myself out there, like this talk, for example. This is not what I really feel comfortable doing. It's not like, oh, I'm gonna do public speaking. It's like when CreativeMornings approached me, I kind of went to and said in my head, like 99% of my body went, no. Then the 1%, which is kind of a parallel going on, took over and said, yeah, go ahead, do it. So here I am. So when you think of crossover, it's not just crossover different careers, but it's also like learning new challenges and bringing them back into what you do in life, whether it's what your current career is or your family life or anything like that. So one of the things I like to bring up is an example, it's a radio station, is music. Artist by the name of Flying Lotus. Have you heard of Flying Lotus? He's a hip-hop producer, electronic producer, who just put out this amazing album called You're Dead. It's basically a crossover album for him, and on different levels. The theme of the album and the music of the album. The music of the album is basically a jazz album for all intents and purposes. So he took his, normally he does beats and stuff, but he decided to do something completely different and do a jazz record. But also on the concept of the record, it's about death, crossing over to the next life. So I thought that was an interesting way to kind of start off with a song. Again, I'm doing this twice again. So I'm going to play a little bit of the song. Is that cool? Hope it works. Jazz album, he collaborated with Herbie Hancock. So hip-hop electronics was a jazz artist. And also this track, the hip-hop part is called The Bar. And it's basically the song is about the fears of death. And being anxious about crossing over to the next life. Have you heard this song before? So you all got name tags out there that says basically blank what I wanted to be when I grew up. So how many are doing what you doing right now what you want to do when you wanted to grow up, I guess? Raise your hands. So, Justin, you wanted to be a radio DJ when you were a kid. So, I guess basically, this kind of deals with my whole life as a crossover. Growing up, I want to be a lot of different things. One, a computer programmer. When I was a kid, I got a TI 99 4A computer with cassette tape, and I learned how to program. I went to a week-long summer camp on programming where I made a blackjack game. I also always wanted to be an architect. I love drawing buildings. I love drawing a lot. Comic book artist. Even when in high school, I started my own comic book company called Chili Comics. I created this character called Hopper, which is a prehistoric grasshopper that got transported into the future. And a musician. I actually took lessons in guitar and piano. I was a classical and jazz pianist up until before I started college. I did it for almost 10 years. And chef. The funny thing about the story, I love cooking. And the funny story about cooking, my first endeavor in cooking, my parents left me my brother to babysit, and they said, we'll be back in 30 minutes. I had a Pillsbury cookbook, so I was looking for recipes that could be done in that span of time before I get in trouble. So there were sugar cookies. So I decided to make the sugar cookies. Unfortunately, I didn't understand the concept of time of 30 minutes. It smoked up the house. Eventually, the cookies became burnt. And tennis pro. I played tennis for over 20 years. But that of all those, the last one is unlikely now due to my age and the fact that I drink a lot of beer. But we're going to come back to a lot of these, with the exception of tennis pro, and how it comes back to what I want to do and grow up to now. So college. So when I was in high school, I had to decide what I wanted to do. So I could be a chef, so I was looking at culinary schools. I could go be a computer programmer. That sounds cool. This is before the internet, before startups, before people were making millions and millions of dollars. Or I could be an architect. So those are three choices I was thinking about doing. So with my 17-year-old intellect and immaturity, this is the rationale I came to decide on my major. Chef. I get to smell like food all day. No, didn't want to do that. Computer programming. Too geeky. Girls don't like that. Architect. A little bit of geek, but a little bit of chic, sexy. I think girls might like that. So that's how I decided to become an architect. So I went off to Howard University in Washington, D.C. and it's a 5-year program, Bachelor of Architecture. I also received a ROTC scholarship. It kind of explains my military career if you read the bio, where I also went to ROTC classes, part of mandatory, at Howard University. God, I keep forgetting there's 2 computers here. So my freshman in college, right there is a picture of my first model. Before we even started design classes, we had a program called graphics, where we started kind of initial ideas of what design is, and we had to do our first critique. If you're familiar with architecture school, I suggest if you have friends that want to do it, talk them out of it. Seriously. Go to law school, doctor, you have a social life in law or doctor. No social life in architecture. So my first model, we also had the first critique. This is the idea where you present your idea to a bunch of professors who you think they'd be nice to you. Of course, they're nice to you when you talk to you on the way to school and class. They're like, hey, how you doing? But when you're in a critique, that changes. So this first model, my critique, was brutal. It was basically one of the professors walked up and like, what is this? And walked off to the next project. And it was a kind of a devastating day. I wasn't the only one that happened to it, but it weeded a lot of students out. A lot of them went to engineering, one went to design, one went to communications. So we started with like about 140 students. And at graduation, I think there was 40. So that was my first model. And I had contemplated transferring, but I decided for some strange reason, I'm going to keep doing it. I think I was dropped on my head when I was a kid, so. Also, while in architecture, one of the things I got into was comic book collecting. I became a comic book collector. Not only because of the stories and the art, but also it helped me in my design work. and presenting my design ideas. The whole idea of how comic books were presented, how telling a story also helped me tell stories and how I presented my design to professors. And later in the years, my projects got better and better and better, and my critiques got better and better and better. Also, as I mentioned before, I was in RTC. So, yes, this is when I was 21. So it was like 1994, Fort Bragg. Went to what RTC, what you have to do. It's kind of like basic camp, but for officers in RTC. So it was 6 weeks in Fort Bragg where we had to do all this kind of training like basic camp does. You had military exercises, you had to learn swimming, you had to sit in a field for 5 days in lovely Fort Bragg humidity. And this is the graduation of at advanced camp in Fort Bragg. And when I graduated, I became a commissioned second lieutenant. And then after advanced camp, another interesting I volunteered for myself, put myself out there for, was, I don't know, still don't know why I did it, was a program that RTC have is called CTLT. It's kind of like an internship for military cadets. And so I was an architect, so yeah, I want to volunteer for engineers. I want to know what engineers do in the military, because there's no really architects, but there's engineers. But I didn't realize there's different types of engineers. There's construction engineers, there's like road engineers, there's civil engineers, but there's a thing called sapper engineers. How many heard of sappers? I had no clue what sapper is. And I said, that sounds like fun. I get to go to Fort Drum, New York, and while my friends in the medical program goes to Germany, I'm going to Fort Drum, New York to hang out with sappers and get the bill stuff. Of course, one of my friends say, do you know what a sapper is? No. Well, they blow up stuff. So for 3 weeks, I get to train with sappers and actually do what you call live fire exercise. So you have this 20-year-old hanging out Fort Drum, playing with real rounds of weapons, guns, and also learning how to deploy real mines. So one of the exercises I actually did was in a field for a week where we had two teams. One of the teams goes out, deploys an actual mine. The other goes and detects that actual real live explosive. Lucky for me, I was the one detecting live explosives. And a quick little story was, so that when you do this, you follow the person with the detector, exact steps. So in front of me was a private. So the detector gets up, my guy with the mine detector gets further up, they call a private. I'm right behind the private. And they say, private, come. Private just runs. Doesn't follow the steps, runs. And I'm sitting there going, I could have been blown up. I like freaked out. And they like scream, stop. So he's right in the middle of the field, of no trace of where the mine was placed, because he lost the steps. So we sat there for about 30, 40 minutes to try to retrack the steps of the mine detectors to get the private out of the area, and the poor cadet, who was me, right behind the private. So it's supposed to be funny. You're gonna look at me. I'm still here. But also got a chance to play with C4, and I built Bangalore mines. It was kind of a fun experience, but I will never do it again. Also at college was my first dabble in the music industry. That picture is me with the band Republica. Anybody remember the band Republica? No, 90s band? So I interned at this cable access music video show called New Music, whatever the year it was. Aired in New York throughout the East Coast, and I don't know why I decided to do it. It was not like I was like a huge music fan. I decided I wanted to do something different while I was in college. And started volunteering here. I get to meet artists like Chuck D, Cypress Hill, Wayne Coyne, and Flaming Lips. But there was no thing in my mind like, I want to do this for a living. None. It was just like something fun to do. And so this is a picture with Republica and one of the guys who ran the cable show. So we're going to come back to this later, how it ties in all to my radio experience. So the whole thing is about learning all these new experiences and bringing it back forward and to what I'm doing now. It kind of helps me in my career, what I do now. And then graduation, barely. Part of architecture, you have to do a thesis. So it's a whole year-long thesis you work on for graduation and presentation for all the professors at the end of the year. and you won't graduate unless you pass the thesis. So my thesis idea, where's my book? I have my book. Ah, there it is. Cool. Well, I'll hand this out. My thesis was a crossover thesis. Like most people did typical architecture projects. I'm gonna do a hospital, I'm gonna do a house, I'm gonna do a neighborhood, I'm gonna do a skyscraper. But I decided to, for some strange reason, I was starting to read these books on chaos and complexity theories in science. And I said, oh, this is cool, I love this. What if I could apply this to architecture? So my idea was taking the theories of chaos theory and applying it to architectural design. So it becomes the idea of creating dynamic architecture that adapts to your environment, adapts to the users. Of course, the whole idea of computers and 3D technology wasn't there when I was there, so all my presentation was hand-drawn. So to try to implement this in the design became kind of difficult for me. But I had a 60-page thesis explaining the process. So when it came time to present, all I had, for the most part, was a thesis. While everybody else had presentations and stuff, I had a few drawings. And I came present, and it wasn't as bad as my freshman critique, but it wasn't great. And I was kind of stressing out and graduate. I was not going to graduate on time. My professor comes to me, he's like, you did a good job, you need to present. And I thought I was going to graduate on time. And then 2 days before graduation, I get a call from the school. It's like, where are you? You got to come sign your paper for graduation. What do you mean? I didn't complete my project. No, you graduated. And I, come by the school, talk to the guys. Yeah, you did. You did all this work and you took a risk in doing this. And you get effort for this. You deserve to graduate for all the work you did. So what I learned from that is they appreciated the fact that I took a risk on design. While other people did the typical projects to get it done and graduate, I did something completely different and wasn't necessarily rewarded with an A, but I was rewarded with a diploma to move on. So the moral of the story is part of the crossover is to take risks. I mean, there's fear in doing the unknown. Like me coming here was fear. Like me living in Minneapolis, about to get my architecture license, settled in with a girlfriend, had a radio show on the Current, had a huge part of the music community there. To come here and change career and meet whole new people was a huge risk, but at the end, it paid off. Graduation into the real world. I graduated in 1996, right at the beginning or middle of a recession. And architecture industry, building construction industry, is used the first hit in a recession. So I had no job when I graduated. I had a commission as a second lieutenant, and the Army wasn't really trying to bring new people in it because there was no war, no anything else. So I was in D.C. working at part-time jobs at a software store, working in an Armani exchange. That was weird. I was packing T-shirts, and they kept patting us down every time we went there. Like, we were stealing T-shirts from Armani exchange. And I'm like, I can't do this. I'm not stealing your T-shirts. So I'm sitting here trying to figure out what to do, and I got an opportunity to work at NIH, National Institute of Health, doing an interesting thing where I go around the whole campus of NIH, measure buildings, come back and digitize the buildings so they have all their plans on the computer. One thing you don't know about NIH, it's a huge campus full of people who are experimenting on things and animals, and they have grants to get access to buildings. So when you come around with a tape measure, the people who have access by grants, they get kind of scared. They get defensive, like, are you moving me out? But also you get to see some weird things because there's a lot of animals, and it's a weird place to be. Beautiful campus, but once you get into the crannies, nooks and crannies of NIH, it kind of gets kind of scary. So that was my first job out of college. Then I got an opportunity to work at Northwest Airlines. And as you see, I don't have a non-traditional career in architecture in the beginning. So again, there's this crossover of I'm an architect, but I'm not in an architecture firm. So I work at NIH, then I get this job at Northwest Airlines, which is no longer there. I think it's bought up by Delta, to become a design manager. So I started off as a junior design manager working on the terminal in Detroit. So I get to work with architects. So I get to manage and work with architects and tell architects what to do, which is kind of a weird thing for somebody who's wanted to be an architect. But it was an interesting experience. But one of the coolest projects I did in Detroit when I lived in Detroit was this virtual reality model of the Detroit terminal. And why we did that was to try to get quicker approval for FAA, because part of when you design a terminal and towers, you got to make sure they have clear line of sight, they can see certain planes, there's no shadows. So the idea came that they wanted to build a virtual reality model, and my boss, who's an alumni of University of Michigan, they had this virtual reality lab. And they decided they wanted me, with my love of computers, to manage this project to develop a virtual reality model to present to the FAA. And so what you're about to see is a result of that. The website's still live, which is kind of interesting, because this is back in 1998. So I developed the plans and the mock-ups and the drafting and the CAD files to give to University of Michigan and work with them to develop a virtual reality model. So on the left, that's kind of the picture of the terminal, which was called Midfield Terminal at the time. And to the right is a photo of my boss wearing goggles in a thing called a cave. And they had FAA officials going in there so they can see the heights and determine if the heights are right and they can approve the tower for the project. So that happened. If you're curious, you want to write down, there's some videos there still of that link. You can check out the virtuality. So I got to dabble in virtuality in 1998. And then Minnesota Cold and radio. My first dabble in radios when I got promoted in Northwest Airlines to become a design manager, full-fledged design manager for Northwest Airlines in late 1998. So I moved to another city, no friends, no family, to a city that apparently I was told it was not that cold. From a friend who used to live there, I met in Howard, decided to move to Arizona because it was too cold. So I moved to Minnesota to work for Northwest Airlines. I was there for 5-6 years. I became a design manager where I managed different projects in different regions like Canada and West Coast. But while I was there, I got really bored and cold, mostly cold. I didn't know what to do. I was like, I gotta move. This is boring. The city is really miserably cold and boring. I had no friends. And then someone gave me tickets to check out this really cool show called Groove Garden Holiday Bash, which was a radio show. And when I went there, I was like, this is cool. I saw Atmosphere, and this is before they really took off. And they had a sign-up sheet to volunteer, and I started volunteering at the radio station, KFEI. And I started doing the news. My intention was to be an engineer. It was not to be on the air at all. And they said, well, we don't have any kind of stuff like that to do, the engineer kind of stuff, but you want to be on the air? I'm like, not really. You'd be good. Sure. And so I did the news for a while. Then eventually I became a co-host of that show, Groove Garden, at the show I went to at First Avenue. And I did that show for 5 years. Then later, this happened. This flipped my world around. 9/11 affected me in the military, affected me in my job at Northwest Airlines. Northwest Airlines affected the airline industry immensely. A month later, I was laid off. I had no job. I went to school. They gave me money to go to community college. I went to classes for marketing and design. I learned graphic design, marketing, and photography. And while I was laid off, I finally got a temp job with a developer, finally got in a real architecture firm. But this opportunity happened. The Current launched in 2005. And someone knew I did a show on KFEI, which is kind of like MSE and here, asked me to apply for the show. Again, 99% of my body said no. I don't want to work for the big boys of NPR, The Current. But my DJ partner, who's on that picture there, said, hey, let's do it. So we applied for the show, and I got a show on The Current. And the show became Rhythm Lab Radio, which is kind of a crossover show, which basically is redefining what I call the urban sound. It's like most people think of urban sound as hip hop and R&B. I decided to say it's more than that. It's the jazz, it's the world music, it's the reggae. Any music that's made in a urban setting is urban music, and that show is still going on here today. Then Milwaukee. I got a weird phone call while doing this show from somebody starting a radio station called 88.9 Radio Milwaukee in 2006. And it goes, hey, I'm such and such from Milwaukee. And my first inclination says, Milwaukee? Okay. And it says, hey, I heard your show. I love what you do. I want you to talk to you, fly you out. Oh, okay. All right, free trip. Sure, Milwaukee. So he flies me out, come to the station, which is still down on Valete Street. It hasn't been launched, not on air, and basically asks me all the ideas about my show, Rhythm Lab, and he knows I was very savvy with computers, and I'm sitting and we're talking, and it's like, I love your ideas, cool, thanks for your ideas. Flies me back, get a phone call later, and says, hey, we want to offer you a job. I'm like, Milwaukee, right? Yeah, okay. So I thought about it. I was like, well, I'm about to get my license. I'm about to do this. I got a girlfriend. I got all this. Sure. Yeah. It's like, I go call him back. Says, yeah, sure. So I'm thinking of a salary offer that might like scare him off. Gave him a salary offer, and he didn't budge. So here I am. 88.9 Radio Milwaukee. So they created a position basically based off my loves. My love of music and radio, which I developed in Minnesota due to boredom. And so my whole crossover life at this point, it's been an accident. So this job, in a sense, was an accident, but I set it up. So in a sense, it's an accident, and it's also not an accident, because it would I did it because of the need to do something, and I decided I found something I love, and now it became my career. So while 88.9, I became a digital manager. I learned how to, understand apps and programming, website development. Also learned about producing shows and audio. So it's been an interesting transition. And I know a lot of people ask me, would you ever go back to architecture? And I've said, I would love to, but probably in a different capacity. Like one of my ideas is I would love to go design furniture. I don't know, but I'm not going to try to force it or try to say I want to do this. I just, my life is sort of like I'm going to let it happen. If I like it, I'll do it. If I don't, But right now, I truly enjoy what I do, and I think I found kind of my calling. And of course, it's kind of all by accident. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is my endeavor, kind of my biggest crossover endeavor, a thing called Unlooped, which was born out of kind of selfishness and frustration living here and dealing with the music scene. The music scene here is full of very talented people, talented musicians, but they're very insular, isolated. People stick to their neighborhoods, stick to their genres. There's never any crossover. And living in Minneapolis and getting that music scene, there was tons of crossover. Atmosphere played with punk bands. Doomtree played with rock bands. It was a natural thing in Minneapolis, but it wasn't that natural here. So that's where the frustration came. But the selfishness came because I like seeing cool musicians play together. It's kind of like fantasy football for me, picking that musician, say, hey, I want you to perform. But I couldn't have these musicians just perform for me. That'd be kind of weird and creepy. So Unloop was kind of a way to do it in a show and sell tickets and make a little money for these artists. Where the premise is surrounded by electronic music, is to bring different musicians together, different genres, to reinterpret art and to reinterpret music and themes. So in 2011, I did a show where we reinterpreted a producer called Jay Dilla, based a string quartet, 4 string players from different genres and different backgrounds, a DJ and a producer. And we did a show at Stonefly. And then most recently in March, we did a show with Marvin Gaye where I had 20 artists. Verona Presents commissioned me and came up to me and asked me, "Dude, I want to do this." Again, the 99% of my body said no, and then 1% said, "Hey, why not?" One of these days I need to blind and tie up my 1%. But I did that show and brought together 20 different artists from different neighborhoods, different genres, to reinterpret Marvin Gaye's Hear My Dear album, which is kind of a concept record, a divorce record. And actually, one of the artists is right there from the show, so you can say hi to her. So that was kind of the biggest crossover thing I've done, and a serious crossover. It's not only a crossover for me, but it's also a crossover for those musicians. A lot of musicians, one, never heard of that album, never played that kind of music. If they did, never heard of Marvin Gaye or Hear My Dear. So it was a crossover for musicians, crossover for me for do a show like this. I mean, basically, I became a curator and kind of a director, producer. So it's kind of a new job in a sense. Whether it becomes a new thing for me, I don't know. I'm not going to force it again. But I'm going to close out, hopefully, with a video, which should last right around the 20-minute time, showing the first On Loop, kind of a rehearsal video of the On Loop Dilla's show, which one of my coworkers put together, and then 2 of the songs from Marvin Gaye from the show at Alverno Presents.
Get ready, 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 get ready.
Y'all ready for some live shit? Welcome to the D, baby. It's all live down here.
But for the first loop that he processed that he's gonna drop in, that's the line. And I figured it would be cool if we all started with that line. And there's a bass clef line as well for like the strong beats and what I felt like the motion of the loop was. If you guys want to try that, if you want to try something else, again, it's there for the reference.
The A section is just the...
Okay, so this is for the B section.
B section is... Alright, you want to try this again? Yeah, let's try it again. Alright, here we go.
I hope I'll learn I'll never really profit for things I do with rage. One more time, anger. When it's flaming hot, it burns to the bitter end. And when it cools, I find out too late. I have lost your love, dear friend. I ain't gonna let you get the best of me, babe. Gonna go somewhere cool. This ain't the way my hair's supposed to be, babe. Got me feeling like some silly fool. But I know you all night long. Take a bath in milk. Lay on your satin sheets, laughing and smiling. Oh, lay in chocolate mint, candy sweet, living across the way, living across the way. This is a song. Keep on singing all night long.
I had some other things to say. I ran out of time, but I guess it's time for Q&A.
Yeah, we can take a question or two. Got a question for Tarik. Sam.
Hey, do you still do comic book stuff, or do you still draw?
I got back into drawing. I have an iPad Mini. Here's another crossover story. I'm part of the Brewers Creative Council. So I help out on a team of people to give ideas for brewers to help market to a younger demographic. And for my service, I got an iPad Mini. but I bought this thing called Pencil, which is kind of like a stylus for the iPad, which is very pressure sensitive. And I started get back into sketching and drawing again on this app called Paper. So hopefully in next few years or a few months, I'll get like the goal is to try to draw something every day in this kind of thing called Paper, because it has like these virtual books. You can like sketch books, and then eventually you can send these books off to be printed onto moleskin. So
I look forward to reading it.
cool. Actually, yeah. After I recovered from Marvin Gaye, I'm on the board of True School, which is a nonprofit organization for hip hop education and getting kids engaged in community. I want to do a unloop for youth, where I pair up True School kids, MCs, producers, and singers with the Milwaukee Youth Symphony Orchestra. Hopefully I'll try to meet with the executive director of the MISO in a couple weeks and talk to her about the project, where it might be involve workshops and hopefully a show. My ideal vision is to have a show at the Pabst Theater for these kids, where we get a grant hopefully to pay instructors to help the kids realize their idea and vision for a show, and they put on a show at a great venue like the Pabst Theater. So. One of the things I forgot to mention while you're thinking about questions, if you have questions, is while I was here, 2009, 2010, I was post-deployed to Iraq. And I served in Chicago as a public affairs officer, which basically public affairs is sort of like public relations, but different, where public affairs mostly try to stay true to the facts, for the most part. But I went to school. I'm actually a certified public affairs officer. I went to DINFOS, which is in Fort Meade, and I trained there for 3 months as a public affairs officer, and I got to learn how to write talking points, press releases, and some of the exercises was actually, they had a kind of a fake journalist out there, and we gave a scenario of a tragedy in Iraq where I had to answer the questions, which was kind of an interesting experience. And I think there's someone also that went to DINFOS. You still here? Yeah, so it's a fun experience. So I haven't used that yet. I don't think I have. I don't know, but.
One more question.
So you kind of accidentally moved a lot. Do you have a sense of what it would take to keep you in Milwaukee?
I don't know. It's I was in Minnesota for 9 years. I didn't think I was gonna be there for 3 years. You know, I was in D.C. for 6 years. I thought I'd be in D.C. for, longer than that. It's what my spirit says to me. It's kind of like this job that came about. I don't know why I said yes, really. I mean, other than the fact that he agreed to the salary amount, but that wasn't it. It was the fear of not doing it, the fear of regret of not doing something. So if I stayed in Minnesota and I'm sitting there going like, what if happened if I went to Milwaukee and did this? So I can't say. I love what I'm doing here. I mean, I can see myself being here for another 10 years, 15 years. But, I have an interest in cooking. I cook a lot. And one of the people in Marvin Gaye is a chef, and she knows that, and she's invited me to help her out. So I don't know what that might lead to. So I might be a chef. My idea of growing up, when I get 50s and 60s, is like open a restaurant in Savannah, Georgia, maybe. I don't know. So.
Look forward to eating there. Thanks again, Tarik.
Sure.